is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie O.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Another round of diplomacy in Paris as US President Joe Biden says Vladimir Putin could be targeted with sanctions if Russia invades Ukraine.
So since he acknowledges the ministerial code applies to him, will he now resign?
UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson braces for the official investigation into illegal lockdown parties in Downing Street.
Germany debates how to get more people vaccinated as the country reports record new infections.
And it's Electric Avenue. Bentley, the luxury UK car maker, unveils plans for its first fully electric car amid record sales and growing demand. Well, another round of international diplomacy to try to avert a war in Europe. Diplomats from the so-called Normandy group of countries are meeting in Paris to discuss the growing tension in Ukraine. Russia's representatives are attending, along with delegates from Kiev, who say a peaceful settlement to the crisis is still possible.
Well, let's go straight to Paris and talk to our correspondent, Ryan Thompson. So, Ryan, what's the latest from the talks where you are?
Hi there, Robin. Well, these talks kicked off about 5 hours ago at 12 o'clock local time, and we expected them to be pretty quick in terms of wrapping up around 3 p.m. And then we were expecting to hear from Ukrainian and Russian diplomats in their respective embassies to give us an update about how it went, how things stand. But it actually seems that talks are dragging on much longer than expected and likely to go on for a few more hours, as diplomats seem to be at least making some kind of progress in averting and finding a path towards peace, seeing that that's possible. It's very promising signs, according to people I've been speaking to in the Elysee. Of course, this Normandy format talk has been centered. It's seen as the gold standard, even higher than EU negotiations on a crisis dispute between Russia and Ukraine for many years now, because there seems to be a way for these countries to come to a consensus, and it seems to be at least proving quite successful once again.
And Russia's foreign minister says he doesn't want negotiations prolonged by including the EU. Well, that suggests that Moscow still sees the United States as the only serious player in these negotiations.
Yeah, throughout this crisis process, we've seen Moscow turning to the United States, meeting with diplomats in Geneva at one point, because they see them as a path towards moving quicker out of this, versus the European Union, though they are in agreement about what needs to be done. When it comes to the question of sanctions, there's just not the same consensus that we've seen from other crisis disputes previously. That is largely because, in terms of the European Union, there is a lot to lose, and they are not exactly on the same page about that in what sanctions could potentially bring here. Of course, there's the question of security, of sovereignty, and of energy, but there are fears, especially as you head east within the continent, that any sanctions that could be placed by the European Union on Russia could have huge ripple effects across these 27 member countries, notably for a country like Germany, who has been a bit hesitant to go as hard as a country like France has. So this is the large reason that Olaf Scholz received the French President Emmanuel Macron just last night to discuss what these talks today would focus on when their advisors went to the table with Russia and Ukraine to see how far they could go in terms of making threats, but also receiving some concessions.
Ryan Thompson in Paris, thank you very much.
Well, the Kremlin has dismissed those threats by the United States that sanctions could be made against President Putin himself if Russia invades Ukraine. Let's talk to our correspondent in Moscow, Stuart Smith. Stuart, this seems to echo the recent threat from the UK that Russian individuals may be targeted in any new sanctions.
It does, and for a while now we've been hearing from the United States and the UK and others that any sanctions imposed will be unlike Russia's ever seen. We're getting more detail now as states narrow down on what exactly those sanctions might be, and this claim that President Putin would be potentially on the receiving end of these sanctions was easily dismissed by the Kremlin today. They said that there would be no effect on Russia, and the only outcome of doing so would be to further worsen diplomatic relations. Any country joining that round of sanctions would be effectively ending diplomatic ties with the Kremlin. We know the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, does have potential.
I'm terribly sorry about that. I think we've lost the line to Moscow, which is obviously we're probably frozen given how cold it is, but we might try and return to our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow a little later in the programme. For the moment, we'll carry on with the rest of today's news.
Meanwhile, in Ukraine, fears are rising that if the tension results in conflict, the country's water supplies could be targeted. Our correspondent Stephanie Freed reports.
The carbonate water reservoir in eastern Ukraine's Luhansk region is scarred by the dozens of mortar and artillery shells that have hit the facility and surrounding areas in recent years. The compound's 5 reservoirs and pumping stations provide 500,000 area residents with drinking, bathing, and cooking water. It is situated near a Ukraine Army infantry position, putting the compound and the residents it serves in the line of fire.
From a professional standpoint, this place is strategic and vulnerable. From the reservoirs to the pumping systems and pipes to the electricity substation, it can all be hit.
There's no doubting the vulnerability of this compound. Dozens of mortars have fallen here throughout the years, but the damage isn't visible because of the snow cover. The carbonate facility was built in 1930. 8 years after Ukraine came under Soviet rule. 61 years later, Ukraine regained its independence. Water reservoirs are replenished by the nearby Donets River. Water pools are buried beneath cavernous 20-meter-high dirt mounds, insulating them against freezing in winter and cultivating algae in the summer. Inside water housing and pumping units, pipes and pumping systems are antiquated and rusty.
If high-caliber shells hit the area, they will damage the water lines. At concrete pipe connection points, even if there's no direct hit, a blast wave can cause damage and leaking.
A few hundred meters of the underground pipe system were upgraded in recent years, but the network is spread out over several kilometers. With the looming threat of an escalation between Russia and Ukraine, the reservoir and the people it serves remain vulnerable. Stephanie Freed, CGTN, Carbonite, Ukraine.
Intel has won its appeal against a $1.2 billion EU antitrust fine. The US chipmaker was fined 12 years ago after being found guilty of trying to squeeze out a rival. The judgment by Europe's second highest court annulled that ruling. It's seen as a major setback for EU antitrust regulators.
European low-cost airline Wizz says Omicron pushed its business into a loss over winter, but it hopes to turn a corner later this year. The Hungarian carrier says it made a worse-than-expected operating loss of $240 million in the last 3 months of the year. But Wizz is forecasting that new larger planes and expansion of its routes across Eastern Europe should see it back in profit by summer.
And the international air cargo business is flying. Airbus is soon to start renting out its huge Beluga planes, which are normally used to transport aircraft parts between factories. The move increases options for cargo customers wanting to move very large or heavy objects by air. Airbus says it will lead to the creation of a commercial cargo airline from 2023.
Who should be blamed if a self-driving car crashes? Some UK watchdogs are suggesting it's the manufacturers rather than drivers. 2 government bodies in the UK are lobbying for new legislation regulating self-driving vehicles. The law commissions from England, Scotland and Wales said once the vehicles are in autonomous mode, the person in the driving seat should not be held responsible for accidents. Completely self-driving cars are not yet legal on UK roads.
And we'll stay with the car business because the luxury car maker Bentley Motors has announced that its first battery-powered electric vehicle will be built in the UK. The plan is part of a 10-year sustainability push worth $3.4 billion. The first vehicles will be ready in 3 years' time as the company plans to become carbon neutral by 2030. Juliette Mann spoke to the CEO, Adrian Hallmark.
I think, first of all, we're the first pure luxury manufacturer that has launched hybrids, and the Bentayga was the first. The Flying Spur is the next car that we're launching with a hybrid powertrain, last week, in fact. The Bentayga, from a standing start, we expected about 15% of sales to be hybrid. Last year, it was over 20, and the vehicle wasn't available for the full year because we launched it in spring. So the customer feedback and the customer pull for electrified powertrains already is fantastic. We're the first there with hybrids, and we're going to be the first there with full battery electric vehicles, and first there with a full portfolio of only electric. So, yeah, we're leading.
Well, we've got to talk about your record sales for the second year running. And I know that the United States is your biggest market, but China, a growing customer base there.
Yeah, we launched in China in 2002, actually, and the brand has developed incredibly over that 20-year period. We'll be celebrating the 20th anniversary this year, as you can imagine. But yeah, China was within a few tens of sales lower than the US, so they're pretty much exactly the same. And this is fantastic development for us as a business. But the other important thing for the company is that we're balanced. So China is about 24% of our sales, but so is America, and so is Europe, UK combined. And then South Asia and Middle East is about 25, 26% as well. So overall, we have a very balanced portfolio, and China is now a strong fourth pillar of our performance.
Where are you getting your semiconductors from? I know that this is something the sector relies on hugely. That has been a sticking point for much of the auto industry. So how are you doing it?
Well, we're very fortunate. Sometimes being part of a large automotive group gives us huge benefits. And the semiconductor crisis is one such example. So as a company, we would build circa 10, 11 million cars a year as a group. Sorry, not Bentley. Bentley, 14,600 roughly last year. So if you take the total car market around the world, we're a tiny part of it. And fortunately, the supply of semiconductors to Bentley has been prioritized within the Volkswagen Group. So as we say, touch wood, so far, we've had no loss of production, no stop of production, or loss of sales as a result of semiconductors. And that's a very privileged position.
It has been a couple of unprecedented years, big challenges. What might not stop you in your tracks, but hold up the big plan?
I think, first of all, semiconductors in the short run are still a concern. We know that from a global perspective, there's not endless supply, and it nowhere meets the demand from all new tech industries. And if we look at the way that our cars will become way more complex in the future, with autonomous capability, more connectivity, and more digital content for the consumer to enjoy on a daily basis, this will even increase demand versus today. So it's not just a tactical short-term issue, that's a mid-term issue as well that we have to watch very carefully. Secondly, if we look at car markets, now, COVID initially had a major negative impact on car markets. The rebound has been incredible. The question is, how long does the rebound continue, and will it normalize again? But we're confident that with the youngest product portfolio that we've ever had in the market at one time, with the number of derivatives and hybrid launches and special models that we're launching over the next 3 to 5 years, and then with a full electrification program from 2025 to 30, 5 cars in 5 years, it's a firework display of product launches that will transform the brand, the factory, the product portfolio, and we'll have to deal with the tactical issues as we go.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson is bracing for the official report into those illegal lockdown parties in Downing Street.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Beijing, China's capital and its cultural nerve center. A modern metropolis with traditional roots. And now it becomes the first city in the world to host both Summer and Winter Olympics. After 14 years, the biggest sporting extravaganza returns to Beijing. Thousands of athletes from around the globe will compete in over 100 events at 3 zones. Cheered on by over 1.4 billion Chinese citizens and millions abroad. CGTN will bring you a ringside view of the historic event. 2022 Beijing Olympics, the games that matter on CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Just a reminder that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms. On Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
The UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he will not resign over those illegal parties and lockdown at Downing Street. He was speaking during a rather rowdy Prime Minister's question time in Parliament. Johnson's expected to be handed an internal inquiry report into the alleged gatherings in the coming hours, if not days. The police have also launched their own investigation. The opposition Labour leader Keir Starmer accused the Prime Minister of showing contempt for the public.
On the 8th of December, the Prime Minister told this House, I have been repeatedly assured since these allegations emerged there was no party. So since he acknowledges the ministerial code applies to him, will he now resign?
No, Mr. Speaker. But, you know, since he asks about COVID restrictions, let me just remind the House, and indeed remind the country, that he has been relentlessly opportunistic throughout. He has flip-flopped from one side to the other. He would have kept us in lockdown.
Well, let's talk now to our correspondent, Ollie Barrett in London. So, Ollie, we saw Boris Johnson there getting another grilling in Parliament. What else has he said?
Well, he really did deny the opportunity from a number of opposition MPs to say that he would resign, repeatedly insisting that he absolutely will not. He says he wants to get on with the job and deal with other important issues, from Ukraine to the cost of living crisis. The opposition Labour Party agree with him in one sense. They also say the government is distracted by the controversy around parties and has more important issues it should be dealing with, but their solution to that problem is
rather different. They are continuing to say that he should step down, he should resign, and that his Conservative MPs should try and force him out as well. It was a rowdy PMQ's session. Boris Johnson did seem to be trying to get on the front foot to push back against the Labour Party here, more strongly than perhaps he has done in recent weeks, and there was quite a lot of support for him on the Conservative benches, with cheers behind him as he pushed back against the Labour leader, Keir Starmer. And PMQ's does give him that weekly opportunity to push back, but it also gives the opposition and their leader, Keir Starmer, that weekly opportunity to grill the Prime Minister and try and put him under increasing pressure as the entirety of Westminster waits for that crucial report from the civil servant Sue Gray.
Well, as you say, we're still waiting for that Sue Gray report into illegal lockdown parties. How likely is it, though, that it will trigger a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister?
Well, we know that a lot of Conservative MPs have been saying that they are waiting for the Sue Gray report before they decide what to do. So it partly depends exactly what Sue Gray has found. It also depends partly on exactly the response from Boris Johnson to it. We know that he had been calibrating a response which would see the report come in from Sue Gray, Boris Johnson probably apologising again, taking questions in the House of Commons. We would expect to see resignations among his staff, perhaps some sackings as well, and a promise to change the culture in Downing Street and try and move the conversation on. The real difficulty for Boris Johnson with that strategy now is that you also have this police investigation going on in the background as well. So even once we get this report from Sue Gray and we get the response from the Prime Minister, that investigation from the police into potential illegality will be hanging over the Prime Minister and Downing Street and his staff.
Ollie Barrett in London, thank you.
Well, let's talk to Sir John Curtis, Professor of Politics at Strathclyde University in Scotland. John, we're waiting for this official report into Downing Street parties and then the police investigation. It was a robust performance of Prime Minister's Question Time today. Do you think Boris Johnson will survive?
Well, I certainly don't rule the possibility out. I mean, clearly, at Prime Minister's Questions, particularly this week, also true of last week, the Prime Minister adopted the tactic of reminding the troops behind him of the various things that he believes he's achieved as Prime Minister, starting with Brexit, the vaccine rollout, what he now claims is the fastest growing economy in the G7, etc. And in a sense, decided not really to address, for the most part, the questions about Partygate that was coming from Sir Keir Starmer, but instead using it as an opportunity to, as it were, to try to demonstrate to his colleagues that he still retains the ability to be an effective potential campaigner in a general election. But at the end of the day, partly because of concerns about ethics and certainly also partly because of concerns about the interests of the party and indeed their own political careers, MPs, I think, when the Sue Gray report comes out, will be balancing what Mr. Johnson says are his attributes against two crucial considerations. First of all, to what extent, according to this report, was the Prime Minister involved in the various gatherings that seem to have taken place in Downing Street? In particular, does his apparent claim that, whatever happened was certainly never something that he knew was going to happen, and was never part of any of the planning, etc. So that's one crucial question. How culpable is the Prime Minister directly for the various breaches that seem to have occurred? The second is, how honest has the Prime Minister been in the various accounts that he's given, particularly in the House of Commons, about what he did or didn't know? Remember at the beginning of December last year when this story first broke, with the video of his former press secretary, Allegra Stratton, trying to defend the gathering at the 20th of December in a mock press conference, that at that point he said, look, I've been given repeated assurances that, there weren't any parties, the rules were always kept to, etc., etc. Well, that line has certainly looked more capable of being attacked, and the question is whether or not, in fact, Sue Gray gives us any indication as to whether or not, in fact, the Prime Minister always knew that there were various gatherings whose relationship to the rules was perhaps always somewhat problematic.
For an international audience, Westminster politics can sometimes seem rather opaque. The Prime Minister can be replaced without an election by his own parliamentary party. Do you sense the ruling Conservative Party will dump him in what's called a confidence motion?
I think the honest truth is we don't know the answer to that question. I mean, so far, to get a vote of no confidence, we need 54 Conservative MPs to call for a ballot, and then a ballot is held, and it's the outcome of that ballot will depend on the Prime Minister's fate. At the moment, only 8 MPs, I think, have come out in public to say that the Prime Minister should stand down. And I think it's difficult at the moment to detect a tsunami of support for holding such a ballot. But the truth is, given those 2 criteria I've just given you, it's how MPs judge the Prime Minister's position against those 2 criteria when they see the report. And also, given that probably this is not going to be settled straight away, how the public react. Now, a lot of the reason why this is causing the Conservative Party trouble is that the public, including a significant section of those people who voted Conservative in 2019, voted for Boris Johnson, are saying that the Prime Minister should resign, that they doubt that he's been telling the truth. And as a result, also, support for the Conservatives in the polls has fallen. Now, what they'll be looking to see, because we'll get some instant polling, is what the public make of it. Are they confirmed? Do they even perhaps go further in their view that the Prime Minister wasn't telling the truth and that he should resign? Or does that mood begin to be reversed? Much could depend on that. If indeed the numbers become even worse for the Prime Minister in the wake of the Sue Gray report, then Conservative MPs might decide that this is going to be impossible for him to turn around, and that a man who undoubtedly was an electoral asset to the party in 2019 is now at risk of becoming a liability. If, on the other hand, the numbers start to move in his favour, then maybe they will feel that, like the Houdini of a politician that he's known to be, he's already begun to find the way out of the escape hatch.
And let's just say he is toast. Whom should we be watching as his replacement?
There are 2 front runners in the non-race that's going on so far. The first is Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who is certainly the best known of the cabinet ministers, apart from Boris Johnson, but actually has not been in Parliament for, 4 years or so. Relatively inexperienced, but certainly has demonstrated that he has what we would call in English the gift of the gab. He's a very effective public speaker and communicator. Principal rival, Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, who certainly seems to have been trying to promote herself with pictures of herself in tanks, which are rather similar to those of Margaret Thatcher. Although she voted Remain in the Brexit referendum, Mr. Sunak voted Leave, she seems to have been forgiven for that. She has embraced Brexit with a considerable degree of enthusiasm, and in her former role as the Secretary of State for International Trade has been responsible for negotiating quite a lot of the trade agreements that the United Kingdom has put in place as a result of its exit from the European Union and the fact that it's no longer part of trade relationships between the European Union and various other countries around the world.
John, good to see you. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Mr. John Curtis, Professor of Politics at Strathclyde University in Scotland.
Germany's debate on whether to introduce mandatory vaccination rules is intensifying as the country reports a record number of new infections. The mandatory vaccination proposals are facing an uphill battle with deep opposition from some groups. Well, Trent Murray is in Berlin for us. So, Trent, what's the focus of today's debate?
Yeah, well, German lawmakers from all sorts of parties have spent much of the afternoon debating this controversial move. It essentially comes with about 74% of the country currently double-dosed, having had both vaccines. But the government here would like to see that number much higher, and so they are finally having this discussion inside the Bundestag about this controversial move. The reason I say finally is because this has been a public discussion which is being had in Germany now for many, many months, really dating back to the election in September. But Olaf Scholz and his coalition government have just been stepping quite slowly with all of this because they do know it's a controversial move, and so they've been trying to find other ways to increase the vaccination rate. But it does seem, certainly from the statistics, that they have somewhat plateaued, and so now the health minister here, Karl Lauterbach, himself a virologist and a pretty outspoken supporter of COVID-19 restrictions, he is now leading this push to try and look at guiding some legislation through the German parliament. But as I said, today really is about just taking the first step in all of that. The German government just wanting to move slowly with this, given the controversy that surrounds such a nationwide vaccination mandate.
Well, as you suggested, the idea of compulsory vaccination in Germany is a deeply divisive issue. Why is that?
Yeah, look, it is. I mean, on the surface, there is a clear majority amongst the German public for supporting this type of mandate. I mean, generally polling shows about 65% are in favour. But when you go into the numbers, what you find is that there is still a real divide between different regions of Germany in terms of vaccination levels. Certainly those states in the former East Germany have much lower vaccination rates than some of the regions in the West. And so that is why, the German government is just wanting to take this easy. We have seen a very vocal minority of people very much against this, protesting on the streets increasingly right across the country. And so that is really the balancing act now for the German government, is to try and bring people along with this controversial process. But what we will see, I think, as well in coming weeks is an increase in advertising. The government here saying it does need to do more to try and encourage people to get vaccinated. But it is, of course, worth noting in all of this, Germany's Germanic-speaking neighbour, Austria, is only days away from introducing a vaccine mandate there. Many politicians here in Germany saying they will be watching the reaction there over the border to influence how they decide to vote in this upcoming possibility here in Germany.
Trent, thanks very much. Trent Murray there in Berlin.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, markets rally ahead of the latest monetary policy meeting by the Federal Reserve. We'll take you to New York next.
It is now important that all of us in Europe act very swiftly.
Fines for the non-vaccinated will most likely be between $1,000 and $4,000.
The new Omicron variant circulating in southern Africa.
The financial markets have also reacted badly to the news.
Growing dissatisfaction with the way the Dutch government is handling the pandemic.
Cancelling the city's main public Christmas markets for the second year in a row.
Protests and riots by those opposed to restrictions and vaccinations.
There is no room for complacency in this ongoing battle against COVID.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Another round of diplomacy in Paris as US President Joe Biden says Vladimir Putin could be targeted with sanctions if Russia invades Ukraine.
Our other headlines, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson braces for the official investigation into illegal lockdown parties in Downing Street.
And Germany debates how to get more people vaccinated as the country reports record new infections.
Markets have rallied ahead of the latest monetary policy meeting by the Federal Reserve. Investors are looking for more signs that the cost of borrowing is set to go up in the coming months. But there are sudden and aggressive rate hikes by America's central bank on the way as energy price rises and the threat of war in Europe looms. Let's talk to our correspondent John Terrett in New York. John, today the markets are rallying.
Yes, I know. What would you like me to say about that, Jamie? I mean, really, I don't know what to say. I don't think many of us do. We're in a very, very strange world at the moment. Yes, Jamie and Robin, the markets are rallying very strongly today. The Dow was up around 500 points an hour or so ago. Now it's up about 360. But the story of the last couple of days is quite interesting. And in fact, there was a mirror image on Tuesday in New York to Monday. If you remember back on Monday, the Dow fell to 1,115 points and then swung dramatically back in the last couple of hours trading to be up by around 99 points. And then yesterday, Tuesday, pretty much the same thing happened on the Dow. The Dow was down around 800 points and then it swung all the way back to be down just 66 points, which is pretty much the same thing as Monday. And what's going on here is we do have this balance between war talk regarding Russia and Ukraine and Europe and the United States that is very pronounced here on American television, really quite dangerous talk, in my view, from some outlets. And then at the same time, you've got the central bank, the Federal Reserve, meeting. It's complicated, but they always meet for 2 days. They began on Tuesday. They will finish today, Wednesday. And they will make a decision about interest rates. But the real problem, of course, is battling inflation, which is at a 40-year high. And most people now think that the Federal Reserve got it completely wrong. Originally, they thought that inflation would only be transitory, just with us for a couple of months. Now it's going to be with us at least until the end of the year. So the question is, what will the Federal Reserve do? And then you have to remember that the U.S. economy is considered by Wall Street to be pretty strong, generally speaking, at the moment. But having said that, it is slowing down a little bit. And we know this because in the fourth quarter earnings that are now coming in on the S&P 500, about 80% of the companies that are reported are beating Wall Street expectations, but they're not doing it in a very, very stellar or exciting way. So they're doing better than Wall Street thought they would do, but no one's going, oh my gosh, these earnings are absolutely amazing. So in other words, in summary, today is a very, very delicate and a very, very important day for the central bank and its leader, the chairman, Jerome Powell. He will put the decision on interest rates out at what is going to be 2 p.m. here, 19G around the world. We're not expecting them to make any moves on interest rates today. But again, as always, he'll then give a news conference, which will be virtual, from about 19:30 onwards. And whatever he says in that is likely to give us a pretty good idea about what the Federal Reserve is thinking of doing and will move the markets. There's no doubt about that. But at the moment, a rally of 360 points. Jamie.
And I know you hate questions like this, but get your crystal ball out. Yes. What's expected to happen?
Yeah, I hate questions like this, but let's have a go, shall we? I mean, you know, I am told if they are too hawkish on inflation and interest rates, in other words, if they say, oh, we've got to act quickly, we've got to, do it really soon, and we've got to increase interest rates massively so that, we really curb this inflation problem. They might even introduce a cheeky little quarter-point interest rate increase, which nobody expected, maybe even today, potentially. If they did any of that, then, there would be a huge sell-off. If, on the other hand, they're too, what you call, dovish about inflation and then there's likely to be risk back on. Markets are likely to buy again, and they're likely to go up. But, you know, I do have to say, by the way, that if that were to happen, if the interest rates start going up again dramatically, then that is actually going to help borrowers, you know, savers, people who have money, retired people who have money in accounts. It'll be good news for them. Never mention them normally, but it is worth pointing that out. I think it's also worth pointing out that what the Fed is likely to do after March, and I think today they'll confirm that this is definitely going to happen, they're going to rise interest rates by quarterly steps 3 or 4 times this year, but we'll only be back to 1% at the end of the year, which is nothing really in terms of what we've seen historically. Many people think that the S&P 500 may go down by 20% before they start buying again. So it all depends on what the Fed chair says today. A couple of things to wrap up at the moment. Microsoft is leading the Dow at the moment after some pretty strong earnings yesterday, with the cloud business up 46%. And so right now the Dow is up 360 points. The Nasdaq is up 2% and the S&P 500 is up 1.5%. So it all depends now on what is said in the next couple of hours at the Federal Reserve in Washington, D.C. I hope I made that clear there. It's very complicated.
Extraordinarily clear. John, lovely to see you. Thanks for that. We'll talk no doubt tomorrow. John Terrett, our correspondent in New York. See you later.
Hungary is introducing a price cap on certain foods from February. Prime Minister Viktor Orban says it's to protect people against rising inflation, which is running at around 7.5%. Our correspondent in Budapest, Chris Jones, reports.
Hungary's inflation is at a 14-year high. The price of basic necessities like milk has gone up, but Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban says he has a plan to protect the most vulnerable.
We decided that in the case of 6 products, sugar, flour, sunflower oil, pork leg, chicken breast and milk, we will intervene to control their pricing. This means that the cost of these 6 products will be reduced to what they were on the 15th of October last year.
If retailers don't follow the government's plans, they could face fines of up to $10,000 or be shut down for 6 months. In reality, the price cut isn't drastic. For example, sugar will fall from $0.85 per kilogram to $0.83, and flour will drop to $0.64 per kilogram, down from $0.69. Stall owners here at Budapest's central market have mixed views on the policy.
Everything already has the same price as in last October.
We have to do whatever they say. They will assign a price, and that's what we will have to use. That's what will happen. It probably won't be good for us.
We've been selling pork leg at the same price as October, so we don't have to decrease the price. If suppliers increase costs, we will obviously keep the October prices. We haven't raised the price of pork in the last 2 years.
Many of the vendors here say that the price caps will have very little impact on them in reality, and because of that, some economists say that the move is purely political, with the Hungarian election only 3 months away.
It is clear that this measure is about elections and is not about stopping inflation. Reducing VAT would be a much better way of doing that.
Hungarian opposition parties have criticised the price cap policy and say it's an admission of Hungary's poor economic state. The general election will be held on April 3rd. The government says it will wait for the results before deciding whether the price controls will continue. Chris Jones, CGTN, Budapest.
The stalemate continues in Italy's presidential election after 2 rounds of voting failed to deliver a result. The main point of contention is the potential political fallout in Italy and across Europe if Prime Minister Mario Draghi gets the top job. Our correspondent Hermione Kitson explains in Rome.
As the grand electors cast their votes for a 3rd consecutive day in Italy's unprecedented presidential election, it's hoped a secret agreement on a new head of state is edging closer. But the process is riddled with challenges.
So we must imagine a game with a lot of players, with very little rules,
and every player trying to extract as much as possible. It is bound to be complicated.
In the initial rounds, most of the 1,008 MPs and regional delegates cast blank votes as political blocs struggled to reach a compromise on a name. Prime Minister Mario Draghi is considered one of the main contenders, but his appointment to the top job is problematic on several levels.
This is unique indeed because it never happened before, even though there are no constitutional provision to that happening. And in this case, this will open a governmental crisis.
Therefore, a key theme of backroom talks is who could replace him as PM and hold the coalition government together until general elections next year.
The international community is also watching closely as the former head of the European Central Bank is considered key to Italy's economic stability and the successful rollout of the multi-billion-dollar EU Recovery Fund.
Italy is the first beneficiary of EU money within this fund. Many think that Mario Draghi is an assurance of continuity in this respect.
Experts say that a result could be achieved on Thursday, as a simple majority is sufficient for a win instead of the two-thirds majority needed in the first 3 rounds of voting.
If Mario Draghi is elected, this means that they have found some form of an agreement on a new government. I think that would be a government very similar to the present government because they cannot move around very many pieces.
Another name high on the list is former President of the Chamber of Deputies, Pier Ferdinando Cassini, or there's the possibility that President Sergio Mattarella could be re-elected. His term in office officially ends on February 3rd, and it's hoped by then Italy will have a result. Hermione Kitson, CGTN, Rome.
The Netherlands has eased coronavirus restrictions among Europe's toughest, despite record numbers of new infections. Bars, restaurants and theatres, which have been closed since December, are now allowed to reopen.
The US Coast Guard is searching for 39 people after a boat capsized off Florida. The alarm was raised after a fisherman spotted a man clinging to an overturned vessel about 70 kilometres east of Fort Pierce. The survivor said the group had set off from the Bahamas on Saturday and hit bad weather.
Fears growing for around 850 children trapped in a Syrian jail held by so-called Islamic State. Kurdish fighters and US troops have tried to storm the prison in the city of Hasaka, which was seized by militants last week after they detonated a car bomb and rammed the walls in an attempt to free prisoners. Over 200 people have been killed in the clash.
Japan's fishing industry is feeling ripples from the Tonga volcanic eruption and tsunami. Tens of thousands of farmed fish were killed and other marine industries have been damaged. Phoebe Amoroso reports on the impact and the challenges facing the industry.
The underwater eruption in Tonga triggered tsunami warnings along Japan's coast, as waves more than a metre high headed for its shores. No injuries were reported, but the fishing industry didn't make it through unscathed.
I work as a Japanese amberjack fish farmer, and we have lost about 50,000 fish.
The damage to amberjack fishing in the Minamitami area in southern Japan is expected to total more than $250,000.
The fish were badly scratched. On that day of the tsunami, it was just around the time of the tide, so the rise and fall of the tide and the tsunami happened at the same time. This unfortunately meant the fish got badly chafed in their nets.
Large waves damaged 37 fishing boats across 5 prefectures, and they caused havoc for a recreational fishing business in Mie in the west of Japan.
We use fishing rafts, as do oyster fishing businesses. As the current becomes faster, if one of the rafts is carried away, its ropes and anchor become entangled with the other ropes and anchors. Even if only one moves, it's a problem for all of us.
Recreational fishing has been temporarily stopped as divers work to untangle and fix the rafts. The impact from the Tonga eruption along Japan's coast has been relatively localized, but it brought reminders of the 2011 tsunami and the area's unique geology.
In Japan, we don't only have tsunamis caused by volcanic eruptions, but we also often experience those caused by earthquakes. Of course, we need to pay attention to this. When it comes to this Tonga tsunami, it's important that we take proper countermeasures, such as evacuating quickly and making sure that boats do not capsize. Several did capsize in this case.
Japan's fishing industry, however, faces another threat: climate change.
Oyster businesses are already having difficulties because the water temperature is becoming too high to grow them, so this disaster comes in the middle of hard times for them.
The Japanese government has blamed global warming on drastic declines in catches of many species, including Pacific sauri and salmon. The catch of Japanese flying squid in 2019 was down nearly 75% from 2014.
The government set up a committee last year to discuss the future of fishing and climate change countermeasures. They're urging the fishing industry to diversify their catch and their fishing methods.
The Tonga eruption and tsunami is a reminder that they must navigate geological risks as well. Phoebe Amoroso, CGTN, Tokyo.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, what's in a name? The world's most powerful brands have just been announced. We'll find out if your favourite is among them.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
Tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Tear gas. So it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just gotta be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated. Is the front line now after 9 days of fighting?
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from the front line. Within clear view of this front line position.
Murray, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. What's in a name? Well, quite a bit, according to the latest ranking of global brands. The report shows that big names continue to dominate, but there are also some new arrivals making a stir.
China's TikTok has been named as the world's fastest growing brand, while Apple retained its crown as the world's most valuable brand, worth more than $355 billion, followed by Amazon and Google. Scott Chen is the China Managing Director for Brand Finance, which published the report. I asked him what's behind TikTok's soaring status.
In the past few years, we have been changed a lot in the tech industry, especially like TikTok is, in my opinion, is kind of a new phenomenon. It's just like we call it a dimensionality reduction strike, because if you want to do lots of things from other platforms, for example, if you want to learn something of knowledge in China, you can go to Baidu to search. If you want to have a local life, if you want to learn how to find out a local store, you probably go to Dazhong Dianping in China. If you want to buy stuff like e-commerce, you probably go Taobao, Tmall, or JD.com. And if you want to have entertainment or film or movie, probably you go Bilibili or you go to iQIYI. They're all very famous in the last few years. But now TikTok can conclude all of them. And with a very efficient service for everyone, as long as you have a device called a smartphone. So I think that's the most important reason that they deeply change, or if you like, reshape people's lives.
So what brands do you think we should look out for in 2023?
The tech industry would be very strong. But in my opinion, I think there are 2 ways that can promote this this area. One is the governmental policy, because I can feel that in the last 5 years, there were lots of new innovation happen in this country. And I also believe that in the coming years, the government can guide lots of people to work on the tech industry. Also, I think there's a very interesting thing happened in Beijing. There a new stock exchange has been established in Beijing called Beijing Stock Exchange. And that one actually is another way of promoting the tech industry and tech brand, because the capital can continuously push and support local innovative work.
China and the UK are preparing for another strong year of trade. Business leaders on both sides have been celebrating Chinese New Year despite the political tensions. Our correspondent Nawid Jabakil reports.
It's been 20 years since the Chinese Chamber of Commerce was set up in the UK. During that time, bilateral ties have hit historic highs and lows. But throughout the period, trade has grown. For the 45th year, UK and Chinese businesses have held an event to mark the upcoming Chinese New Year. And for the first time, President Xi Jinping has sent a personal message via the country's ambassador.
Looking ahead, I hope the visionary people from both our two countries, including the business community, will carry forward the ice-breaking spirit and expand mutually beneficial cooperation to give the China-UK friendship a new dimension.
Before the turn of the millennium, China was the UK's 26th largest export market. By 2019, it was the 6th biggest. Both UK imports and exports to the country rose more than fourfold in that period.
From the first icebreakers to open the door to trade links in 1950s, to the trading goods between our two nations now exceeding $100 billion for the first time. We have witnessed concerted efforts from all walks of life in our two countries, generation after generation.
Business may be booming, but politically, relations between China and the UK are tense. Britain has accused China of human rights abuses in Xinjiang and suppressing democracy in Hong Kong. China strongly denies the claims and insists they're both sovereign issues for Beijing. The diplomatic tensions have led to sanctions on lawmakers and officials on both sides. Philip Hammond was the UK's Chancellor when relations were in their so-called golden era just a few years ago.
The facts remain the facts. China is the world's second largest economy, the UK's 6th largest export market, and its single largest source of imports. The UK and China, despite differences, share a commitment to free trade and share too a dependency on safe, secure international trade routes.
Both countries' economies are set to grow strongly this year, meaning trade ties could strengthen even with the political headwinds. Climate change and the pandemic are two key areas the governments are looking to work together on, with March marking 50 years since the UK and China established full diplomatic relations. Nawid Jabakil, CGTN, London.
The headlines again. Another round of international diplomacy in Paris as US President Joe Biden says Vladimir Putin could be targeted with sanctions if Russia invades Ukraine.
UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson braces for the official investigation into illegal lockdown parties in Downing Street.
And Germany debates how to get more people vaccinated as the country reports record new infections.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.